Gather round, dads, it's time for a tale. Hand me a book and a warm pint of ale. Let's discuss writing and the literary gods with Dan Roberts on the Dad Lit Pod.
Welcome to the Dadlit Pod, the literary podcast for people who finally found a use for that piece of wood. Tonight, I'm joined by Seth Ring. Seth loves telling stories and building worlds. He's the best-selling author of the Battle Mage Farmer series and the Tower series. When he isn't writing, Seth focuses on passing on what he's learned about writing and being an author through his YouTube channel and at conventions and conferences around the world. He co-hosts the World Craft Club podcast and community, a world building resource for game masters, authors, and anyone who enjoys world building. Uh, Seth is the author of, oh, I'm sorry, my apologies, Seth. Let me see. Seth is also the author of the Exilian Syndrome series from the good folks at Blackstone Audio and Publishing. Advent is the first in the series. Seth has just come out with his third book. It is a series of alien contact, fast paced military action, and thrilling adventure that will leave readers hungry for more. Thank you, Seth, for joining me. By the way, if you use code DADLITPOD, DADLITPOD, you will get 25% off a physical copy of Seth's most recent in the Exilian Syndrome series, which I believe is Apex, correct, Seth?
That is correct. That's a good deal too.
Yes. That's on physical copies. They've yet to relinquish the 25% on the audio,
Yeah,
which is their bread and butter over
it
there at
is.
Blackstone.
It is. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk about books and dad things.
Yeah, you're my first lit RPG author.
Oh,
Can you explain what lit RPG is?
sure. Yeah. So Lit RPG, in addition to being arguably the fastest growing fantasy and science fiction genre in the world, is any story where there is a game element involved in either the plot or the world building.
Hmm.
So you can have lit RPG that is fantasy, you can have lit RPG that is sci-fi. There are all sorts of different uh, sort of subgenres of lit RPG. It's really kind of an umbrella term for stories that have this game element involved in the plot or the world building. And that game element can be anything from a stat screen that pops up so that somebody can see what quest they're on to some sort of indicator of how strong they are or their abilities or stats. It can be a way of interacting with the world, like you kill the monster or the mob, you get XP, you get to level up. Um, it can be really any number of different things. So I write epic fantasy. I write sort of wild post-apocalyptic Wild West fantasy. I write sci-fi. You know, Exilian Syndrome is a science fantasy adventure.
Hmm.
Uh, so really, I write all of these different types of stories, but they're all under the umbrella of lit RPG because lit RPG is, again, any story that has a game element that's involved in the plot or the world building.
But to be clear, it's not a choose your own adventure style
Correct.
experience.
Correct. So a choose your own adventure book doesn't have to have a game element in it, even though it
Mm.
in and of itself is kind of a game.
Yes.
So I don't know any lit RPG that are choose your own adventure. though I'm sure somebody could make one.
Hmm.
The the conceit is really, is the plot driven in some way, shape, or form by a game element, or is there a game element that's integral to the world building of the story?
Okay. And so, for example, I read the first of the Exilian Syndrome,
Hmm.
uh, which I believe is Advent.
Yes.
And the underlying idea is that the person starts, I almost compare it to Skyrim,
Hmm.
where the person sort of starts down on their luck and then kind of accrues money, fame, and power
Hmm.
in order to accomplish a goal.
Hmm.
So would you say, did I nail it correctly?
Yeah, I think you did. First of all, Skyrim's one of my favorite games, so I'm going to take that as high praise.
Mhm.
Um, Second of all, one of the things that's often true about lit RPG is that progression is incredibly important in the story. In fact, in
Yeah.
a lot of ways, the story is about progression. And so it's not necessarily going to have the same exact structure that your classic fantasy or your classic sci-fi will, because progression, the growth of the character is just as important as what's happening behind the scenes, or the adventure that they're on.
Hmm.
So there really is this sense that the characters in a lit RPG story are going to gain something as time goes on, right?
Hmm.
We very rarely have, though it is possible, we rarely have just flat character arcs where the individual is just sort of fixed and doesn't change throughout the story, and then the story is about them impacting the world and how the world reacts to them. Um,
Hmm.
Typically that's not the case because we always want the character to be growing. We want something, and it's important that that growth is measurable, right? So the game element in X-Lane Syndrome is the readout that everybody has on their wrist, or at least all of the empowered do, that tells them how strong they are, right? It
Hmm.
categorizes their stats, and then as they grow, those those stats go up, right?
Hmm.
And that ability to simply look at your wrist and tell how strong you are or what kind of powers you have is that game element that makes the story lit RPG. Even though, the main character is not on any quest like you would be in Skyrim. Um, Lit RPG authors often treat their books, or their stories sort of like a sandbox, right? You create a
Hmm.
world that has some sort of game element involved, and then you set your characters loose to play in it. Um, and so it is a little bit different than sort of the classic
Yeah.
sci-fi storytelling. Uh, but it is, again, also um, growing at an absolutely unbelievable rate, um, just across the world.
Hmm.
Lit RPG is really blowing up.
What do you think is responsible for that sort of growth? Is it the fact that people are used to playing video games or used to the game system and actually find that more accessible as a way of experiencing a book? Or what is attracting people to it? What attracts you to writing it?
So I think that that's a really good question, and everybody who writes lit RPG, especially from the professional space, we're all trying to figure that out, right? We're all trying to crack that code. I have some ideas, and I've talked with other authors in the lit RPG space about these ideas at length. And what we
Hmm.
sort of ended up on is that lit RPG provides shorthand that allows an author to communicate truth about their story or about their world or about their characters to the reader in a way that doesn't require long explanation. If somebody
Hmm.
has played games before or is familiar with game mechanics, and practically everybody in the world is familiar with game mechanics by now, right? The
Hmm.
idea that you might gain a level is pretty ubiquitous knowledge, right? What
Hmm.
specifically that means is obviously dependent on the system that it's in, but the idea that you can level up is just sort of widely regarded as, okay, this person got stronger. And or there's, some sort of improvement. Something has improved. And
Yeah, I
so
mean,
for
I would say the ultimate fictional representation of lit RPG that I've seen would probably be the Pokemon cartoon.
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely, right. We're collecting we're collecting things, we're getting them to battle. Our Pokemon get to level up. They get
Hmm.
new abilities, they evolve, right? We just understand sort of instinctively almost at this point what all of that means. And so
Hmm.
for an author, it's really easy for me using that shorthand to establish the world building and say, this is the system that we're going to play in. And now every time something happens, I can just reference it, right? He looks at his stats. His strength has gone from C to B. Cool, he's stronger, right?
Hmm.
And if I mention in one line somewhere in the book, somebody who's in, whose B ranked strength has 10 times the strength of somebody who's C ranked strength, I don't have to spend time explaining why the main character is either struggling or has advantage against their opponent. All I
Hmm.
have to do is say, well, one of them is C ranked, one of them is B ranked, and everybody who's reading automatically understands it, right?
Okay.
So that
So it's
shorthand is really helpful as an author because then I can clear out all of the exposition or a huge amount of the exposition
mhm.
to just tell the story that I want to tell.
Okay. So what is, for example, is so to my mind, the way you're describing that, um, it sounds like what it gives you is instead of, you know, explaining the big guy in the bar who has, the tattoo of the snake on his neck and the very thick chain, belt around his waist. You basically just say, "Oh, this guy is X and X rated," which is from a strength perspective, well more than
Hmm.
I could ever, I as the character could ever hope to contest with. And then you get
Yeah,
to the action faster.
yeah. But what's really cool about it is that you can also then play with that because I can
Hmm.
describe the character as big, snake tattoo. He's got the chain belt. Maybe he's got a glove with some spikes on it. And then my
Hmm.
character walks in looking, you know, nothing like that, much leaner, dressed nicely. But if my
Yeah.
character is the one with the B ranked strength and the guy in the bar is C ranked, then it makes absolute sense for my character to be able to overpower that other individual despite the disparity of looks, right? And
Hmm.
so it allows you to take and adjust scenarios and situations to serve your story in a really easy way,
Hmm.
right? Because one of the things that fantasy and science fiction writers have run into over, since we started writing, since the genres started existing, is that there's a certain amount of realism that is required. And there's a certain level of suspension of disbelief that is just a bridge too far, right?
Hmm.
And so if I have my character who's a great fighter, I've described them as a great fighter, I've explained all of that, walk into a bar and they're set upon by three other people, right? Who maybe aren't great fighters. Anybody who knows anything about fighting in reality is going to tell you that the hero better run. because it's just really hard. Even if you're highly trained, it is just very hard in reality to fight three other people. If there are
Yeah.
20 of them, right? So, you know, it's even worse. And so authors have been struggling to find ways to just sort of explain why their hero can do all of the cool things they can do.
Yeah.
And Lit RPG provides, again, that really easy shorthand for explaining my character has better skills. My character has better strength. My character has cool magic powers. My character, can make uh people's arms into noodles. I don't know. Whatever it is, the Lit RPG provides that shorthand or that way of
Hmm.
that ability to establish a rule set that is just easy to communicate. Uh, so I think that's a big part of the attraction. Another part
Yeah.
of the attraction, though, is that there are laws to games, which is that one of them is that games can always be won, right? It's
Hmm.
not a game if you can't win, which means the hero always has a chance. Games games always favor the player, right? And so lit RPG is sort of by definition power fantasy. And
Hmm.
so a lot of the people reading lit RPG are looking for those kinds of stories, right? Stories with high heroes, stories with dark villains, stories even if you're reading, there's some pretty grim lit RPG out there. And even if you're reading that grim lit RPG, there's this sort of in there's this understanding that runs through the entire thing that the hero will be victorious. They will level up. They will get
Hmm.
there, right? No matter how many times it might be a story about grinding. Like there are plenty of lit RPG stories that really focus on grinding as the game mechanic. But as long as they grind, they will get the cool items, they will beat the boss. They're going to reign supreme, right? Like they will
Hmm.
be victorious. So lit RPG doesn't have the same level of sort of grittiness that I think a lot of fantasy and sci-fi has developed throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. And lit RPG, which really sort of burst onto the scene maybe 2015, in my opinion, is a response to sort of the grimming of fiction. And because lit RPG is just as a whole, it tends to be aspirational, right? It tends
Hmm.
to go the other direction. People, there's still plenty of readers who want grimdark, but there are an ever-growing number of readers who don't want that, right? They want the light, the fluffy. This is why, I mean, this is why cozy is all of a sudden a thing again, right? Cozy fantasy stories or yeah, cozy
What
fiction.
what what is a cozy fantasy story?
So a cozy fantasy story is just low stakes. Cozy is really just another way of saying low stakes. So like you can
Okay.
have cozy mysteries. And in cozy mysteries, um, somebody could have died, but their death has not affected anybody who is really in the story. And it's really
Hmm.
just a story in a low stakes setting about solving a mystery, right? And so most cozy mysteries don't have death. But a cozy fantasy might be, I mean, the sort of prime example right now is Travis Baldrey's Legends and Lattes, right? Or it might be a farming story where people
Hmm.
are, the story is about somebody who wants to start a farm. I did write a book like this. It didn't end up being cozy. I tried to make it cozy and it didn't work at all. There's a bit too much stabbing.
But you fed I take it you fed the plants in human blood
It's
or something to
essentially
that extent.
um,
Yes.
something like that. So I didn't succeed in that, but there are plenty of, cozy farming stories where the biggest tension is not whether, the farm is going to get sold off to the evil overlords, but it's will we make it back home before it starts raining? Uh, are we going to be able to uh, figure out this bread recipe? Like it's just very low stakes. It's often a lot of relationship and sort of not even emotional tension, but like the emotional tension is not like will we be together or will we not be together like you'd get having a romance, but it's more like will we be able to resolve this argument, you know, before we have to go to bed.
but in a fantasy setting.
Yeah, in a fantasy setting. And so
So,
there's been this shift, right? And lit RPG is a big part of driving that shift, I think. Um, because it is naturally aspirational.
mhm. Why do you think that fantasy has fallen off the aspirational cliff?
Do you mean, are you
Well,
asking
plot.
why
Well, let's say plot-driven fantasy, for example. Why
why
would
it hasn't
yeah
been aspirational?
yeah what happened to it?
I think that when so there is a interesting trend if you track literature and the zeitgeist. Um,
Hmm.
Typically what happens is in times of turmoil, when people feel like life is awful, they want
Hmm.
aspirational fantasy. And then in times of plenty, when when things seem to be going well for everybody, they begin to want stories about corruption. They begin to want stories about the sort of stories of catharsis, right? So instead of aspiration, you want catharsis. And so often we just see these like this ebb and flow. And I think that a lot of the stories that were coming out in the 90s and the early 2000s were mirroring um a hidden fear about the world, that the world isn't actually sunshine and roses. It's not as good as people are making it out to be. And there is darkness. But because the darkness isn't being represented by the culture in like and it's not sort of forefront, people say, well, let's produce it in our fiction. But then
Hmm.
this it flips, right? You have all of a sudden everybody starts to see the darkness around them and they go, oh man, everything is so dark. And then people start to go, well, actually, there is goodness in humanity, right? There are good things that are happening. You can win, you can succeed because we want to, right? We wish to succeed. We want things to be good. And so people's fiction starts, or their tastes at least start to shift back, right? So I think we're just in that part of the cycle. And I think that the reason that so many stories fell into um into this like catharsis category
Hmm.
is because it felt like everything was kind of fine, boring.
It's sort of the how you sell Marlboro red cigarettes, which is that you give people a sense of an edge
Hmm.
when they're actually quite comfortable because
Hmm.
everyone's got a little bit of a death wish.
Yes. Yeah, I think
So
so. I
similar.
mean, it's very similar where it's like, you know, you always see those memes about like, the man's greatest wish is to hold off the enemy while his wife and children flee,
Yeah,
right?
or alternatively, the bleed out on
That's
a
right.
staircase
Yep.
meme from
Yep.
Blade Runner 2049, which I
And
think is
so
really funny.
so I do feel like there is that like that desire in people for a level of danger and excitement and tension, right?
Yeah.
But when you live in a world that feels really tense, you what you want in your escape is not catharsis. You want to feel good for a moment, right? You want to feel
Hmm.
like everything's going to be fine. We will succeed. We will make it through. So I don't think
Do you
I
think
have a
there's?
preference. I
Oh
have a
well, yeah.
preference.
Tell me.
So my
I'll save mine.
preference, and just because of how I grew up and the circumstances that I lived in, I always have preferred um, aspirational, right?
Hmm.
But I don't think like I think there are plenty of really good stories that aren't necessarily aspirational, where the heroes aren't actually heroes, right? Where nobody like all it takes is stepping a few feet to the side and your perspective on the story completely shifts and now the bad guy is the hero and the hero is
Hmm.
the villain. Like I think good stories can be written that way. So I don't want to, give any of the listeners, this idea that one is necessarily superior. I have a
Hmm.
preference, and so I write one way, but I do think that both are legitimate and both can be good um, in their form.
Yeah. It, it. Do you think there's a danger in giving people what they want?
I do think there's a danger in giving people what they want, and I think that a lot of
That's
times,
interesting.
I do. I think that a lot of times, especially with a genre like lit RPG, you end up if you cater to what the audience, what readers say they want, you actually end up shooting yourself in the foot.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna handle this question sort of two different ways. Um, First is uh, from an economic point of view. People get bored reading the same thing,
Yeah.
and so one of the advantages of lit RPG is that it is it is a blanket genre, right? I can write um I can write suspense, right? Like I have a grimdark fantasy lit RPG story. And I also have sort of this high adventure aspirational lit RPG story, and I have a like sort of Wild West told from the point of view of a native whose world is being invaded by like cowboys and aliens, or the fantasy equivalents of cowboys and aliens, lit RPG. And I have, this science fantasy adventure lit RPG. And like, so I can write all of these different things, and my audience likes it because I have the same shorthand. So I
Hmm.
can I can tie, and I have my own personal genre that I'm weaving throughout all of these different stories. So they can appreciate all of the different stories, right? So from a sort of economic point of view or an author point of view, it makes more sense for me to just write what I want to write and then trust that my core audience likes my personal genre. And so they're also going to like what I write.
Hmm.
From a craft point of view, I do think that it is easy for authors to, and I put myself in this boat, to fall into a trap of just regurgitating the same thing because we think we know how it'll land, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's very important as a creative to stretch and grow and explore new spaces, right? To write genres that I'm not comfortable with, to write stories that I'm not comfortable with, and to figure out how to turn them into the best thing that they could possibly be in, coming from my pen, and uh and really just push that that boundary.
Mhm.
obviously, you don't want to stray from your personal genre. That is, the type of story that you want to tell. And I think everybody has that. Every author has a type of story that they want to tell. Um, but I do think that you need to be able to explore and push and if you only listen, like if I had just said, okay, what did my initial readers want? I would have written the same story. Like I've written 40 some books, right? 40 some books out of in the same story. I don't think most of those readers would still be here,
Mhm.
right? At a certain point, they're like, okay, I understand what this is. I don't need more of it. I've reached, you know, max capacity for whatever story you're telling, and I'm just going to move on to something else.
Who are, other than obviously yourself, Seth Ring, the other big names in lit RPG if someone wanted to go out and find the best of lit RPG, in your opinion? Other than
So,
obviously Seth Ring.
sure. Yeah, yeah. So I am actually one of the OGs, right? I
Okay.
started writing with a bunch of other guys, um, and a couple ladies, like early on, right? Not all of those authors are still around. Um, some aren't writing anymore. But I started writing in about 2015. I started publishing in 2018, and I was in that initial wave of people, right?
Mhm.
I would highly recommend, though, uh, Michael Chatfield as another guy who's just a great author and one of the sort of the old guard for lit RPG.
Mhm.
Um, the if the sort of 800-pound gorilla in the room right now is Matt Dinneman, who writes Dungeon Crawler Carl. That
Mhm.
series is everywhere. It is uh, it is blowing up like crazy, which is awesome because Matt is legitimately the nicest human being on the planet. Um, One of the really cool things about just being involved in the lit RPG community uh, is how nice everybody is. Like
Mhm.
all of the lit RPG authors are fans first, and so we're all super excited to see other people succeeding, right? And
Mhm.
so it's just been a really good environment to sort of come up as an author in. But there are genuinely tons. Uh, the sort of the big names are Matt Dinneman, Shirtaloon, uh, who writes He Who Fights with Monsters. Um, but there are a lot, and
Mhm.
the list always seems to be growing. Depending on what kind of story you're into is also going to make a difference because Matt is at heart a horror writer and does this sort of comedy horror really well. And so Dungeon Crawler Carl sits in that space. And then Haylock Jobson, who's Australian, is he writes Heretical Fishing, which is a cozy lit RPG. So completely on the opposite end of the spectrum. Uh, Also, absolutely fantastic. Um,
What is heretical fishing?
so heretical
Did
fishing
I hear
is,
that correctly?
yeah, yeah. So it's a fantastic story about a guy who's pulled into another world. He decides that he's just going to spend his life fishing. However, there's this big mystery around the sea, and to engage with fish, to pull anything out of the ocean is considered heretical in the land he walks
Mhm.
into, right? But it's an adventure of misunderstanding.
Mhm.
He has been thrust into this world, he doesn't understand it, and so he's just going around and doing things, and everybody else is sort of freaking out about him, and everybody believes that he's this incredibly powerful mastermind. who's uh, a heretic god, and he's just sort of living his life, right? And so Haylock does a really good job of playing with that discrepancy and playing with reader expectations. And so they're super fun. They're cozy. So again, not really very high stakes, but very fun. So yeah,
Interesting.
there's this huge breadth, of stories, which is one of the things I like the best about Lit RPG.
So where do you get the inspiration for your systems as you put them into your work?
That's a great question, and I might get strung up in lit RPG circles for saying this, but increasingly I'm trying to find as the smallest, most impactful point. So when I started, my first series was
Yes.
a virtual reality, full immersion virtual reality video game story. So it was a story about someone who went into a full immersion virtual reality video game, okay, and played the game. And their adventure in the game is what the story is about.
Yeah.
Then I moved from there to a world with a system that gave out quests, had skills, that kind of stuff. Increasingly, I've moved further and further and further away from these sort of really hard concrete systems.
Hmm.
And uh, so Exilian Syndrome, again, he's got this stat block, this readout that he can look at, and skills are categorized. It's a bit of a superpower, like a superhero power system. Um, but then I just also released a fantasy series that I'm working my way through, and in that it's card based. So people collect cards and they slot them into magical cards that they slot into their bodies and get cool
Hmm.
powers. And that's it, right? There's nothing. It's really just a way of understanding the magic system or the power system. Um, Increasingly, I've been writing again fewer and fewer hard rule sets, and I've been trying to find an interesting idea, an interesting conceit that will make the story unique and that will allow me to play uh, with the power system, right? It'll
Hmm.
allow me to establish a simple rule set and then find nuance in it as the characters progress.
Yeah. So things that come to mind, it sounds a lot like the BioShock series, for example,
Yes.
where the BioShock story is going on, but at the same time, what the world you're immersed in and of itself almost a character
Hmm.
that you are interacting with and engaging with, which is interesting. What would you say has influenced and from that perspective your work? What other works of fantasy, science
Hmm.
fiction uh, have led you to your construct of telling these stories? I know Skyrim, obviously, we talked about at
Yeah.
the beginning.
I mean, video games in general. I have
Hmm.
been a big gamer. I love video games. I have a secret confession to make, and this is probably the first time I've actually mentioned this to anybody, but I very rarely finish games. And
Hmm.
I very rarely finish games because I prefer to end a game that I'm enjoying with ambiguity because I
Hmm.
don't want the stories to end. So in 2013-ish, I ran into a another genre called cultivation, um, which or progression fantasy. Uh, though recently they've sort of split into two distinct categories, but both progression fantasy and cultivation are known for just ridiculously long stories, right?
Hmm.
Stories, they're counted because they're usually web serials, they're counted by the chapter instead of by the book. And so we're talking about stories with thousands and thousands of chapters. Okay. So if that were to be put into a book series, you're talking 20 to 30 volumes in the series. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of these are very pulpy, right? You might think about them the same way you would think about Edgar Rice Burroughs or the Tarzan books, which I really enjoyed as a kid and still enjoy. Uh, but I ran into cultivation, and as I started to read those stories, I started to understand that the stories were uh, were unique in that they come from a completely different sort of worldview and philosophy. Um, and then I ran into Lit RPG and was like, oh, this is so interesting because now I can build some of these same cultural distinctions through these mechanics without having to get into as much of the philosophy behind it, right? Because in cultivation stories, um, cultivation is at its core about becoming united with everything, right? Which is a very Eastern way of looking at the world. The path to power is to become integrated into all things, right? Whereas
Mm-hmm.
in the West, the path to power is to become distinct from all things, right? You become more
Mm-hmm.
individualistic as opposed to less individualistic. And so I started to realize that I could play with some of these philosophical ideas without having to get into as much of the philosophy because I had this shorthand, which was game mechanics, right? I can talk about integrating powers into a person's body, uh, or connecting them to the world in different ways through mechanics, because people have, again, this sort of instinctive grasp of how these things work, because they've played games, because they understand technology, because they have some of these similar frameworks. I can use those things as shorthand to create the same effect that I was
Mm-hmm.
getting from these stories that were being translated out of China and Japan and Korea. And that is really sort of what influenced the style of storytelling. Though I will say that, I have to shout out Terry Pratchett, and Discworld. Pratchett is this absurdist fantasy writer who then sort of gets into satire, but he was masterful at giving you enough uh, to make the world he was writing about, Discworld, feel real and concrete,
Mm-hmm.
enough realism for that. And then he was masterful in being able to take something and just twist it a little bit to highlight the absurdity of it.
Mm-hmm.
And in highlighting the absurdity, he makes for these incredibly funny, books, incredibly funny situations and scenarios. And so that's something that I'm always looking to do, to give people enough realism that they can say, okay, I'm in, right? I'm completely bought into this world. And then twisting a few things to just make it exceptional, to make it fantastic, uh, in a way that makes the reader go, "Ooh, this is interesting. I want more. I'm here. I'm hooked. I'm ready to keep going."
Interesting. So you're a dad.
Hmm.
What games are you playing at home with the kids?
So I'm playing a lot of board games with the kids. Now,
Yeah.
part of that is because I own a board game company called Zero Strategy
Oh,
Games,
oh, well,
and
there
so
you go.
we make board
Yeah.
games. Um, and so I play a lot of board games. Me and my kids like to play. I just taught them recently how to play Magic the Gathering, and so we
Nice.
play Magic the Gathering together. Me and my older kids. Um, but I got this really fun game called River Tile Glassworks something. River Glass Works. I don't know. Anyway, um, River Valley. River Valley Glassworks. So I got this game called River Valley Glassworks, which is really fun because it's a shape matching game,
Hmm.
and you auto calculate, and the points auto calculate. So the so I can play it with my older kids, and my 4-year-old can play as well, because she just has to match shapes, um, and gets whatever points she gets.
Hmm.
Uh, so I like board games a lot. I love like interesting game mechanics in board games. But we also, you know, my kids play Zelda, and we play Mario Kart and stuff like that together.
Hmm. And so what are some of the games that your game company have produced?
Yeah, so we last year we produced a game called um, Shuffle Dungeons, which is a tile-based dungeon crawler. And what's
Hmm.
cool about it is that the tiles are double-sided, so you can either play them as tiles in your dungeon to move around, or you can equip them to your character to make yourself stronger. And you're collectively trying to beat the boss. And then we have another little party game called Cutthroat Cove Pieces of Eight, which is sort of like blackjack. You're trying to get to 8 gold doubloons and not go bust, and then backstab your friends at the same time. And then we actually have on the 16th of September, we are launching a Kickstarter for a new game called The Sheep. And in The Sheep, the apocalypse has arrived, and it's just sheep. So you are playing as shepherds who are escorting caravans across a wilderness. And during the day, all of the local sheep are cute and friendly and cuddly. And at night, they mutate into terrifying monsters that'll try to eat your face.
Well, that's
Yep.
that sounds very
It is so
dad
fun.
friendly.
It is so dad friendly. It's a fantastic game, and we're really excited to bring it out. Like I said,
Yes.
come to
What
Kickstarter.
so how do you guys design the games yourselves? Does someone bring a game to you and pitch it to you and then you perfect it and sell it? How does that work?
Yeah, so at this point, we all our games have been in-house, and
Hmm.
we will be continuing that. We're getting increasing numbers of requests for people to like to bring games, and I've seen
Yeah.
some really good games. Not all of the games that get pitched are going to work, uh, but I've seen some really good ones, and so we're trying to figure out, and we haven't quite figured it out yet. Um, we'll be making a decision on it probably sometime closer to the end of the year.
Hmm.
Just whether or not we want to open up essentially a second pipeline for other people's games. Because I know there are a ton of people who have built really cool games, but they just
Hmm.
don't necessarily have that outlet for being able to publish it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas we have a team that can do sort of final polish. We know how to get art. We know how to source everything. We know how to run the campaigns. We can do all of that kind of stuff. So we're considering it. We're not 100% sure yet whether or not we're going to open up that sort of second pipeline or not. But I'd love
Hmm.
to. I'm all for more games being out in the world, and I'd love, I think there are just so many people with really cool ideas who might not have the training or might not have the community that's necessary in order to take a creative project and get it out into the world. And that's not just true for games, right? That's true for writing as well, which is why when I'm not writing, I'm pretty much spending all of my extra time doing well, I should say when I'm not writing and doing game stuff, I spend all of my extra time, which is not a lot sometimes, but doing like writing education, right? Now,
Hmm.
mostly I focus around the business of writing
Hmm.
because I think that that's where the biggest gap is. I could talk about craft for days. Like I love craft. I love writing good books, and I love reading good books, and I'm super excited to help people, you know, make their book as good as possible. But where I think that there's a gap in sort of education is understanding how the business of writing works and how you can take your really cool idea and you can turn it into something that people want to read, and then you can actually get it out into the world in a sustainable way that's going to allow you to keep doing this creative thing that you really enjoy doing. So that's why I'm so passionate about that side of it.
Yeah, me too. I don't know if you've heard. but the Dad Lit Pod loves good marketing and how to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how people can market their books. And one of the ways I've thought would be a brilliant way to market books is games. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm very intrigued by Lit RPG and very intrigued. Do you think that one day you will have a game with a literary tie-in?
So, currently, we built a 3 session module in 5e, D&D
Mhm.
5e, tied into one of my series,
Oh, cool.
um, to the Battle Mage Farmer world. And I've gotten to play it with people, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's super fun. So we have that actually. ZSG built that as well. Our focus right now is on board games. But what's interesting is that the sheep, which we're about to release, um, started as a game based in one of my worlds. So the way sort of the whole thing came to be is I had a an intern, and I needed to figure out something for this intern to do, and he mentioned that he liked
Isn't that
board
always the
games.
way?
Yeah, it is the way. And so he mentioned he liked board games, and I was like, "Oh, cool. I have this idea for a board game. Why don't you just spend the next like 3 or 4 months building it?" Well, he
Mhm.
turned out to be an absolutely phenomenal game designer. Like just incredible game designer. And so this game, we got about 75% of the way through it, and we were like, "Man, this game actually is really fun. It has legs. We should take it out." So over time, we started a board game company. We worked on a different project first, and then when we came back to what became the sheep, uh, somebody made a comment about all of the. So when we were in our testing phase, uh, one of our developers made cards for all of the monsters, but put the same picture on all of them, and it
Mhm.
just happened to be a sheep. And so somebody kept making a joke about how every time we flipped over a new monster, it was a sheep, with obviously different stats and stuff like that. And that idea just sort of took hold of us, and this really interesting and cool world started to develop around this like sort of stupid lore about everything's a sheep.
About the everything's a sheep.
And so we eventually the game started to sort of morph and evolve that direction, and we were like, no, this is actually really fun and it's really cool. And so this game actually has this incredibly rich lore about why the world is the way it is, and it's got this really cool aesthetic. And I'm excited to someday write fiction in that world, right? So to almost
Mhm.
go the opposite way, here's this cool board game and with this great world, now let's build something interesting stories in it. Let's tell interesting stories in it. Um, but we are also working. I can't mention who it is, but we're working with an epic fantasy author uh, to create a game around their world. And I've gotten to play it, and it's really interesting and really fun. Really, some unique mechanics that I've never seen anywhere else. Uh, and so we're excited about that too. So that is very much on our radar, is marrying these two things that we love, right? Good stories and wonderful books, and then fun games that you want to play over and over again. And our hope is to get that tie-in, like you're saying, with
Mhm.
future projects.
So, where are some places that people can find you where you're doing this writing and business of writing instruction, where they can find your games? You have a very long bio.
Yes,
As I was
I
as I was
do.
reviewing it for notes before, obviously, other than the series that you're doing with
Yeah,
Blackstone Audio, which
yeah.
is called, let me get
Exilian
it,
syndrome.
Exilian Syndrome series,
Yep.
which is about Mark
Yeah.
and Mark's many adventures and
Yeah,
the
and
fact that
that
he is
one's man, it is so fun. If you like sci-fi, I
yeah.
like definitely give it a try. It is so fun, and the story is getting wild. Um it's
I
It's
like his
really been fun.
I like his cat, and
Yes.
I like his
Mine's the
his
best.
horrible thing that he carries with him that at any
Yeah.
moment could overwhelm him and
Yeah.
destroy things.
Yeah.
Which
Pretty
is
cool.
great. That's great.
Yep.
Uh,
It
so
is.
so
But
by the
yeah,
way, you could get it. We do. I imagine Blackstone wants.
yes.
Yes, you can buy before we get into the games.
Sure.
You can buy that at Blackstone
Hmm.
with code DADLITPOD for 25% off physical copies at checkout. They were very nice, your publisher. I
Oh,
reached
good.
out to them and I said, it'd be interesting to find out if the Dadlit Pod actually sells books.
Hmm.
And so that's what we came up with. But
Well, I
anyway,
like it.
tell me about where else people can find
Sure.
you and what you're doing.
So the easiest thing to do is sethring.com. That
Mhm.
has all of my books, has all of my stuff. ZeroStratGames.com is the game company. Um, you can also find me on YouTube. Uh, you'll find all of my social links through my website. That's probably the easiest way to get there. But I'm on social media all over the place. If you type Seth Ring into Google, you'll never
Mhm.
escape me because my retargeting is really good.
I need to figure out how to retarget.
Yeah, it's pretty helpful.
Yes, it's very helpful. Well, Seth, before we go, if
Hmm.
there is any, because we get a lot of authors who listen
Hmm.
to the Tablet Pod, uh, is there any advice you would suggest for succeeding in the author world other than writing 40 books, which by default, if someone reads all 40 of them, you're doing pretty well.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, my advice is always the same, which is
Mhm,
write more good books, like, and figure out whatever you're lacking in that sentence, right? If you're lacking the writing, focus there. If you're
mhm,
lacking the more, focus there. If you're lacking the good, focus there, right?
mhm,
If you don't know how to turn your writing into books, focus there. It's just, write more good books is always the key to success. But I would
mhm.
say that if someone is listening to this and they've been writing and they've been publishing and they've been trying to figure things out, um, I would say that one of the best things that you can do is sit down and come to understand your personal genre, right? Genre
Mhm.
is this thing that exists to sell books. It's these
It
little buckets, right, that we drop books into because we know that a certain customer profile is going to buy a certain thing, right? That's all
That's what
genre is.
Dadlit is.
That's
Yes,
right.
you've nailed it. This is
Yep.
exactly what I've been saying. Dadlit is a genre, but it encompasses many
That's right.
things. It's
Exactly.
just books that are easily marketed to dads.
That's right. And
Yes.
that's the way you have to be thinking about it. And then what you
Mhm,
can do with that is you can sit down and you can identify what your personal genre is, right? What is
mhm,
it about your books that readers keep coming back to or that readers mention over and over and over again? And then double
mhm,
down on those things, right? Don't chase the latest fad. Don't try to write to market. Figure out what your core reader wants and then aggressively deliver that, right?
mhm.
Write more good books. That's
There you
all
go.
that's all you're trying to do.
Seth Ring, it's been a delight. Thank you for coming
Absolutely.
on the
Thank you for
Dadlet
having me.
Pod. And go out and buy The Exilian Syndrome, which is about to have a fourth book as well.
Yeah, we're on a rapid release with this one. So book 4 comes out in December, book 5 comes out in March, book 6 will come out in July of next year. Uh,
I
we're
mean,
excited.
you're like a machine gun for lit RPG.
We're trying.
Well, thank you, Seth.
Dan, this has been great.
Great. This has been the Dadlet Pod.
Our time together has come to an end. It's time to return to your wife, kids, and friends. It's time to pick up those books you forgot while you wait for the next Dad Lit Pod.